What did you tell your husband during intimacy that made him call 911? My husband and I had just returned from the hospital when he put his hand on my thigh. I shook my head. Not right now, honey. It's too much. You see, I'd just had my third stillbirth, so the last thing I wanted was my husband exploring my insides. I expected him to put his arm around me and apologize, but instead he just sighed. Babe, are you serious right now? We haven't done it in months. We haven't tried for anything except a baby in weeks, he continued, his voice getting sharper. Stop being such a tease. You're giving me blue balls here. The tears were still wet on my face from crying about our third dead baby, and he was worried about his balls? I was too exhausted to fight, too broken to argue, so I just let him do whatever he wanted. As I lay there staring at the ceiling a minute later, my body feeling like a graveyard while my husband slept with a smile on his face, I was only thinking one thing. He'll never understand what this feels like, unless I make him so terrified during sex that he begs for help. He was sitting on the couch 4 weeks later when I came running back from the bathroom. Honey, I'm pregnant again! His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. Then came the bait. I whispered, and this time, I can't get enough of you. That first time we had intimacy, I'd prepared. I'd put a small weighted ball inside myself, the kind women use for exercises. Halfway through intimacy, I squeezed and made the ball press right against him. To him, it would feel like something inside me was touching him. He jumped. What was that? His face went pale. What was what, baby? I kept moving, playing dumb. He thought he'd felt the baby. I could see the fear starting in his eyes. The next encounter, I waited for the perfect moment. When he was deepest inside, I clenched hard and gasped. Oh my gosh, the baby just moved. He pulled out so fast he nearly fell off the bed. Please, he stammered. I can't. And then I said it, throwing his own words back at him. Don't be such a tease. You're giving me blue walls. He started showering immediately after, scrubbing like he could wash away what he'd felt. The next morning over breakfast, I casually mentioned, funny story, my friend Sarah. Her husband swore he could feel their baby during sex. She divorced him, and now everyone at his accounting firm calls him Kitty Fiddler. Can you imagine? I laughed like it was the most ridiculous thing while watching the color drain from his face. He pushed his eggs around, appetite gone. I knew I had him when he started making excuses to avoid intimacy. Headaches, early meetings, anything to avoid touching me. So I upped my game. I decided to mess with his mind even more. I'd hidden a speaker under our bed that played soft baby crying sounds. That night, while we were having sex, I secretly pressed play on my phone. The crying was barely audible, just enough to make him question his sanity. He stopped moving completely, his whole body tense. There's a baby crying, he whispered. I don't hear anything, I lied, pulling him back down. I almost felt bad watching him panic. Come on, I pressed against him one night. I'm pregnant and hormonal. I need this. I grabbed him the way he used to grab me, aggressive and demanding. That's when something shifted in his eyes. Recognition. Wait, he whispered. This is what when you were crying about. He tried to apologize. I'm sorry about what I did after the stillborn. I switched tactics immediately, voice honey sweet. No, don't be sorry. I get it now. When you want it that bad, nothing else matters, right? Now we can do it whenever. I kissed him hard while he sat there frozen, trapped by his own logic. The crying sounds broke something in him. That night he slept on the couch. The next night, the guest room. He was literally running from me. 3 weeks into my fake pregnancy, I woke up alone and found his side of the bed hadn't been touched. I looked outside. He was curled up in his locked car. I made sure to knock on the window right as Mrs. G walked by with her dog. He's having anxiety about becoming a father, I explained loudly. The poor thing, she said. He just sat there trapped. How could he explain he was hiding from a baby that wasn't even born yet? After a week of sleeping outside, I texted him crying, Doctor says emotional distance from father can cause stillbirth. Please don't kill this baby too. He was back in our bed that night, terrified to touch me but more terrified to leave. At night, I'd catch him whispering to my stomach when he thought I was asleep. Apologies, promises to be better. 3 days later, when he saw me in a sexy police costume from Spirit Halloween, not even he could resist me. We were in doggy position when I made my move. One hard squeeze with the Benoit ball and then I screamed, The baby! Something's wrong! It's coming out! He screamed too, pure animal panic, scrambling away from me. Don't leave me hanging like this! I yelled, using his exact tone from that night. He was sobbing, grabbing his phone, hands shaking so bad he could barely dial. I couldn't hold back my laugh. The sirens cut through my laughter about 4 minutes later. I was still half-dressed on the bed when heavy footsteps pounded up our stairs. My husband sat frozen against the wall, phone still in his shaking hand, staring at me like I was a stranger. 2 paramedics burst through our bedroom door, a woman with her hair pulled back tight and a younger guy carrying a medical bag. The woman looked between us, taking in the scene. My husband in just his boxers, me in the torn police costume, both of us in our bedroom but clearly not okay. She asked who called and what the emergency was. My husband just lifted one trembling finger and pointed at me. I tried to stop laughing but it kept bubbling up. These weird gasping sounds that didn't sound like me at all. The male paramedic moved toward me while the woman stayed with my husband, and I could see her talking to him quietly, trying to figure out what was happening. I wiped my eyes and managed to get words out between the laughs. There's no baby, I told them. Never was a baby. It was all fake. I watched my husband's face as the words sank in. First confusion, his eyebrows pulling together like he was trying to solve a math problem. Then relief flooded his features as he understood there was no medical emergency. But that relief lasted maybe 2 seconds before something else took over. Horror. Pure, dawning horror as he realized what I was actually telling him. That for 4 weeks, every time he thought he felt something during sex, every time he heard crying, every panic attack and sleepless night, it was me. I did it on purpose. I made him think he was touching a baby. The woman paramedic's hand moved to her radio on her shoulder. She asked very carefully if we were both safe here, if anyone was in danger. My husband made this choking sound and suddenly lurched off the bed. He stumbled toward our bathroom and I heard him hit his knees on the tile floor before he started throwing up. The sound was awful, these deep heaving noises like his body was trying to get rid of something it couldn't digest. The male paramedic followed him quick while the woman stayed with me. She guided me to sit on the edge of the bed, her movements gentle but firm. She asked me what happened tonight. Not angry, just careful, like she was talking to someone who might break. So I told her. About the 3 stillbirths, how each one felt like dying but I kept trying anyway because we wanted a baby so bad. About coming home from the hospital after the 3rd loss, still bleeding, still crying, and my husband putting his hand on my thigh. How he said I was being a tease when I said no. How he talked about his blue balls while tears were still wet on my face from losing our baby. The paramedic's face changed as I talked. Her professional concern shifted into something harder to read. She asked if I was currently pregnant and I said no. I faked it to make him feel what I felt, to make him understand what it's like when your body isn't your own anymore. She looked toward the bathroom where we could still hear my husband being sick, then back at me. She exchanged this long look with her partner who had come back from checking on my husband. I couldn't read what passed between them, but it made my stomach twist in a way that wasn't satisfaction anymore. More footsteps on the stairs, heavier this time. A police officer appeared in our bedroom doorway, a big guy with a mustache who looked tired. The woman paramedic spoke to him in a low voice while I sat there in my stupid costume feeling cold. The officer nodded and went into the bathroom. I heard him talking to my husband, gentle questions I couldn't make out. Then he came back and asked my husband to come with him to another room. My husband walked past me without looking, his face gray, and they went downstairs. About 10 minutes later, another woman arrived. She introduced herself as Faye Vaughn, a crisis counselor who responds to calls like this. She had kind eyes and sat down next to me on the bed, not too close but not far either. She asked me to walk her through the whole thing from the beginning. So I did. I explained how I bought the Benway ball and practiced using it until I could make it press against him at the right moment. How I set up the speaker under our bed and timed the crying sounds perfectly. How I watched him start sleeping on the couch, then the guest room, then his car because he was so scared of what he might be doing during sex. How I used his guilt about the stillbirths to trap him, texting him that doctor said distance from the father could cause another loss. I heard my own voice as I talked, and I sounded proud, like I was describing a really clever plan I'd pulled off. Faye listened without interrupting, just nodding sometimes, her face neutral. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she asked me a question that made my stomach drop. Do you understand that what you described doing to him meets clinical definitions of psychological abuse and sexual trauma? The words hit me wrong. I started to argue, to explain that he deserved it, that he violated me first. But Faye held up her hand. Not mean, but firm. Both things can be true, she said. What he did to you was wrong, and what you did to him was also wrong. Those 2 facts can exist at the same time. Downstairs, I could hear my husband's voice talking to the officer. The walls in our house aren't that thick, and his voice carried when it got higher. He was describing the fake pregnancy, the ball I used, the crying sounds only he could hear. How I sent him that text about the doctor saying distance could kill the baby. How he slept in his car for a week because he was so terrified but also terrified to leave in case it caused another stillbirth. His voice broke when he talked about whispering apologies to my stomach at night, promising a baby that didn't exist that he'd be better. Something twisted in my gut listening to him. Not the good twist I'd felt when I was planning this. Not satisfaction. Something else. Something that felt like when you eat something bad, and your body knows before your brain does. Faye explained they needed to take us both to the hospital for evaluation. Not because anyone was in physical danger right now, she said, but because we'd both experienced trauma tonight in different ways. I argued that I was fine. I was in control the whole time. I knew what I was doing. She gave me this sad smile and said that's actually part of what concerns her about my mental state. That I could plan and execute something like this for a month and feel good about it. We rode in separate ambulances. I watched my husband get loaded into the first one, still not looking at me, and then I got in the second with Faye. At the emergency room, they took us to different areas. I sat in a small room with pale blue walls while nurses came in and out, checking my blood pressure, asking questions. Then a man came in and introduced himself as Mateo Vaughn, a psychiatrist who works in crisis intervention. He had Faye's same kind eyes, but his were more tired. He sat down and asked me about the stillbirths. Not about what I did after, just about losing the babies. And something in me just broke. Not the manic laughter from before. Real crying. The kind that comes from somewhere deep that you didn't know was there. I cried about the first baby, how excited we were, how we'd already picked out names and bought tiny clothes. About the second one, how I was so scared the whole pregnancy and then it happened again anyway. About the third, how I couldn't believe my body had failed me again, how I felt like a graveyard that nothing could grow in. Mateo handed me tissues and waited until I could breathe again. Then he asked when I last processed the stillbirths with anyone, like really talked about them, felt the grief, let myself be sad instead of angry. I realized I never did. After the third loss, I came home from the hospital and my husband wanted sex, and I went straight from that violation into planning revenge. I never sat with the grief. Never let myself feel how much it hurt. Mateo said grief that intense doesn't just disappear. It transforms into other things. Sometimes those things are love or art or helping others. And sometimes those things are destructive to ourselves and others. He said trauma can make us do things we never thought possible, can turn us into people we don't recognize. But that doesn't erase the harm we cause when we're in that state. Mateo leaves me with tissues and a nurse who checks my vitals one more time before telling me they're keeping me overnight for observation. Down the hall in a different examination room, my husband sits across from another doctor, a woman with gray hair pulled back tight. He's describing the weeks of terror, how it felt like something was pressing against him during sex, how he couldn't stop thinking about it even when he tried to avoid me. The doctor listens and takes notes, then asks him a question that makes him go silent. She wants to know if he understands that his wife experienced a similar violation when he coerced her after the stillbirth. My husband opens his mouth but nothing comes out. The doctor waits. He tries again and manages to say he never thought about it that way, that he was just trying to feel close to her, that he didn't realize. The doctor writes something down and tells him that intent doesn't erase impact, that his wife's body wasn't his to take just because they were married and grieving. My husband puts his head in his hands. They move us both to observation rooms around midnight, separate floors so we won't run into each other. I lie in the narrow hospital bed staring at the ceiling tiles with their little holes, counting them over and over because it's better than thinking. But I can't stop Faye's words from replaying in my head about psychological abuse. I keep trying to build my justifications back up. He violated me first. He deserved to feel scared. I was just making him understand what he put me through. But each time I repeat these thoughts, they feel thinner, like paper that's been folded and unfolded too many times until it starts to tear. A nurse comes in at 2 a.m. to check my blood pressure and asks if I need something to help me sleep. I say no because some part of me thinks I should stay awake with this discomfort, that I've earned it. After she leaves, I try the justifications again. He forced himself on me while I was crying about our dead baby. That's worse than what I did, isn't it? But the question mark at the end feels bigger each time. The morning nurse brings me breakfast that I don't touch, and then there's a knock on the door. My brother Dion walks in, and I can tell from his face that the hospital called him as my emergency contact and told him enough to make him drive here at 7 a.m. He stands at the foot of my bed for a long moment before speaking. His first words are exactly what I expect, and nothing I want to hear. He asks what the hell I did. I start to explain about the stillbirths and the coercion, but he holds up his hand to stop me. He says he already knows what my husband did to me, that Virginia called him an hour ago, that everyone knows everything now. Then he adds something that makes my stomach twist. He tells me he knows what my husband did was wrong, but I tortured him for a month. The word torture sits in the air between us. I want to argue that it wasn't torture, that it was justice, that it was making him understand. But Dion just looks at me with this expression I've never seen before, something between disappointment and concern, and I can't get the words out. Dion pulls the chair closer to my bed and sits down. He says we need to talk about this. Really talk, and that he's not leaving until we do. So I tell him everything from my perspective. I start with the third stillbirth and how my husband wanted sex while my face was still wet from crying. I tell him about planning the fake pregnancy, buying the weighted ball, hiding the speaker under the bed. I describe watching my husband's terror grow each week, how he started sleeping in his car, how I trapped him with guilt about causing another stillbirth, and then I tell Dion the part I haven't admitted to anyone, not even Mateo. I tell him how good it felt to watch my husband suffer, how satisfying it was to see him panic and scramble away from me, how I enjoyed every moment of his fear because finally he understood what violation felt like. Dion listens to all of it without interrupting, and when I'm done, he sits back in his chair. He's quiet for a minute before he speaks. He tells me that Mom would be horrified by this, and I start to argue that Mom would understand after what my husband did. But Dion shakes his head and says no. Mom would be horrified not because she'd defend him, but because this isn't who I am, or who I was. He's not sure anymore. While Dion and I are talking, I hear a commotion in the hallway. A woman's voice I recognize asking which room, a nurse giving directions. My husband's mother, Virginia, arrives on my floor, and I watch through the small window in my door as she walks past toward the other wing where they must have my husband. Dion sees her too and says this is about to get worse. I can hear Virginia's voice through the wall, muffled but distinct enough to make out the tone. She's asking what happened, her voice high and worried. Then I hear my husband crying, actually sobbing, as he tells her his version of events. I can't make out his exact words, but I hear the rhythm of confession, the pauses where Virginia must be reacting. Then her voice changes. It goes cold in a way I've never heard before, sharp and hard, and I realize she's just learned what her son did to me after the stillbirth. My husband's crying gets louder. Dion squeezes my hand and says we should probably prepare for her to come in here next. 10 minutes later, Virginia appears in my doorway. She looks at me with an expression I can't read, something complicated that might be anger or disappointment or both. She comes in and stands at the foot of my bed, and Dion quietly excuses himself to give us privacy. Virginia speaks carefully, like she's thought about her words. She tells me that my husband explained what he did after my loss, and that she's ashamed of her son for that. She says she raised him better than to take what wasn't freely given, especially from someone he claimed to love while they were both grieving. I start to feel relief that she understands, that she's on my side. But then she pauses and her expression hardens. She adds that what I did to him, making him think he was molesting a baby, is something she never thought me capable of. She says she's known me for 8 years, and she would have sworn I wasn't the kind of person who could torture someone for weeks, who could enjoy watching them break. But now she doesn't know what to think about me. She doesn't know if the person she thought I was ever really existed. The hospital releases us both later that morning with a stack of paperwork and referrals to trauma therapists. A social worker explains that they strongly recommend we don't go home together immediately, that we both need time and space to process what happened. Dion steps forward and offers to let me stay with him. Virginia, who's been standing stiffly by the nurse's station, says my husband can come to her place. The social worker looks between the four of us and says that sounds like a good plan. My husband and I are both in the hallway now, about 15 feet apart, and we have to agree to this arrangement without looking at each other. I say okay. He says okay. The social worker makes us both promise we'll call the therapists on the referral list within 48 hours. We both promise. Then Dion puts his hand on my back and guides me toward the elevator, and I can feel Virginia doing the same thing with my husband in the opposite direction, and that's how we separate. No goodbye, no last words, just moving in opposite directions down a hospital hallway. Dion's apartment is small and neat, the kind of place where everything has a specific spot and nothing is out of place. He sets me up in his guest room, which is really just his office with a futon, and tells me to rest. I sleep for 14 hours straight. When I wake up, it's dark outside and Dion has left a sandwich on the nightstand. I eat it without tasting it and go back to sleep. The next day is the same. And the next? I spend 3 days mostly sleeping and staring at the wall when I'm awake. The manic energy that fueled my revenge completely gone. It's like someone pulled a plug and everything drained out, leaving me hollow and heavy at the same time. Dion brings me food and checks on me but doesn't push me to talk. He goes to work during the day and comes home at night, and I can feel his disappointment radiating from him even when he's being kind. Even when he asks if I need anything or tells me to take my time. The disappointment is there in the careful way he looks at me, like I'm something fragile that might also be dangerous. On day 4, I force myself to shower and get dressed because I have an appointment with Karen Blanton, the trauma therapist the hospital recommended. Dion drives me there and waits in the lobby. Karen's office is on the second floor of a converted house, with soft lighting and a couch that's actually comfortable. She's younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes that remind me of Faye. She asks me to tell her everything and I do. I start with the stillbirths and don't stop until I get to the hospital and Virginia's face. When I'm done, Karen is quiet for a moment. Then she tells me something I don't want to hear. She says she needs me to understand that she's going to hold space for both truths, that I was violated, and that I became a perpetrator. She says both things are real and neither one erases the other. Karen explains that trauma responses can make us do things we never thought possible, that our brains sometimes short-circuit in the face of overwhelming pain, and we lash out in ways that feel justified in the moment. But she adds that this doesn't erase the harm we cause. That understanding why we did something doesn't make it okay. She asks if I'm ready to look at what I did without the shield of justification, without telling myself he deserved it, or that I was just making him understand. I sit there on her comfortable couch and I'm not sure I am ready. I'm not sure I can look at myself as someone who tortured another person for a month and enjoyed it, but I also don't know what else to do, where else to go from here. So I say yes anyway because maybe that's where healing starts, in the terrifying moment when you agree to see yourself clearly, even though you're pretty sure you won't like what you find. Karen doesn't give me easy answers. She just nods and writes something down, and then looks at me with those kind eyes that somehow make me feel worse instead of better. 2 days later, Virginia calls me. Her voice sounds tired and older than I remember. She tells me my husband started seeing a therapist named Dr. Reed, and that he's having panic attacks bad enough that he had to leave work twice last week. She says he wakes up screaming some nights and won't tell her what the nightmares are about, but she knows. Part of me feels this rush of satisfaction hearing it. Like, yes, now he knows what it feels like to be scared in your own body. But right after that feeling comes this sick twist in my stomach because I'm the one who did that to him. I'm the reason a grown man is waking up screaming. At my next session with Karen, I tell her about both feelings, and she asks which one is stronger. I sit there trying to figure it out, and I can't. They're both there at the same time. The satisfaction and the sickness, and I don't know what that makes me. Karen leans forward and asks me something I wasn't ready for. She wants to know what I thought would happen after the revenge was complete. What did I imagine the outcome would be? I open my mouth to answer and realize I don't have one. I never thought past that moment of him calling 911 and me laughing. Never considered what comes after you spend a month making someone think they're doing something horrible. I just wanted him to feel what I felt, and I never looked beyond that moment of revelation. Karen writes something else down, and I wonder if she's noting how messed up that is, that I tortured someone without even thinking about what would happen next. The week crawls by at Dion's place. I sleep too much and eat too little and watch TV shows I don't actually see. Then my phone buzzes during a therapy session. It's a text from my husband. Just 4 words. Can we talk, please? I stare at it for a full minute before showing it to Karen. She asks if I'm ready to face him. I tell her I don't know, but we probably have to eventually since we're still married and own a house together and can't just pretend the other person doesn't exist forever. She asks if I want to respond now or wait. I type back yes and suggest a coffee shop near Dion's apartment, and we agree on Saturday at 2. Both our therapists know about the meeting. Karen makes me promise to call her right after. Saturday comes and I get to the coffee shop 10 minutes early. My husband is already there. He looks terrible. There are dark circles under his eyes so deep they look like bruises. His hair needs cutting and his shirt is wrinkled like he slept in it. I probably look just as bad. We sit down across from each other at a small table by the window and neither of us knows how to start. I order a coffee I don't want just to have something to do with my hands. He already has one in front of him that's clearly gone cold. We sit there for what feels like an hour but is probably only a few minutes. Finally, he takes a breath and starts talking. He tells me he's sorry for what he did after the stillbirth. that he was selfish and cruel and violated me. The words sound rehearsed like he practiced them with Dr. Reed. Then he stops and his face does this thing, this crumpling, and he tries to add something else. Something about what I did to him. About making him think he was touching. He can't finish the sentence. His whole body starts shaking and he has to put his hands flat on the table to steady them. I feel this huge urge to defend myself, to list every single thing he did wrong first, to explain why he deserved what I did. But instead, what comes out of my mouth is different. I hear myself say I know what I did was wrong and I can't take it back. The words feel strange and foreign, like they're in a different language. Because part of me still doesn't fully believe them. Part of me still wants to insist he deserved every second of terror I put him through. We sit in silence after that. It's not a comfortable silence. It's heavy and full of all the things we can't say. The coffee shop has other people in it. Normal people having normal conversations, and we're just sitting here with all this damage between us. Then he asks me something that hits harder than I expect. He wants to know if I ever actually grieved the babies, or if I just went straight into planning my revenge. The question makes my chest tight, because the answer is no. I never let myself fully grieve. I took all that pain and loss and just channeled it straight into rage, turned it into something I could use instead of something I had to feel. I tell him that. I tell him about the grief I've been avoiding, and he tells me about the nightmares he's having now. How he dreams he's hurting something small and helpless, and wakes up unable to breathe. We're both crying in this coffee shop. The barista keeps glancing over, looking concerned, but not sure if she should intervene. We just sit there with our untouched drinks getting colder. Two people who destroyed each other trying to figure out what's left. If there's anything left. After a while, we both run out of tears and just sit there empty. We decide we can't make any big decisions yet. That we both need more therapy before we can even think about whether our marriage is salvageable, or if we're just going to be two people who share a mortgage and a history of mutual destruction. He'll stay at his mother's place. I'll stay with Dion. We'll both keep working with our individual therapists for now. Maybe eventually we'll try couples therapy, but neither of us is ready for that yet. We leave the coffee shop separately. He goes first, and I wait 5 minutes before leaving. Like we can't even walk out the door at the same time without it being too much. In my next session with Karen, I admit that seeing my husband's genuine trauma made me feel guilty in a way I wasn't prepared for. Not the abstract guilt of knowing I did something wrong, but the real concrete guilt of seeing exactly what I did to another human being. She asks what I'm most afraid of. I tell her I'm afraid that if I fully accept what I did was wrong, then I'll have to see myself as a bad person. That I'll have to give up the version of the story where I was just making things fair, where I was the righteous victim getting justified revenge. Karen asks me if I think people are simply good or bad, or if maybe we're all more complicated than that. I sit with that question for a long time before answering. Karen waits, not pushing, just letting me think. Finally, I tell her maybe I need to learn how to be both things at once. The person who got hurt, and the person who hurt back. She nods and says that's exactly the work. Learning to hold both truths without letting either one erase the other. She explains that I can admit I caused real damage while still being human. Still being someone who deserves healing. The idea feels weird in my head, like trying to believe two opposite things at the same time. But she says that's what complex means, that I was a victim, and I became someone who did bad things, and both of those are true. She tells me the goal isn't to pick one story and stick with it, it's to accept that I'm more complicated than any single story. I leave her office feeling tired in a way that has nothing to do with my body. 3 days later, Virginia calls me. She says my husband's therapist wants him to join a support group for men who've been through sexual stuff, but he won't go. He keeps saying his situation doesn't count because he's a man, and because he thinks he deserved what happened to him. Virginia sounds frustrated when she tells me this, like she wants to shake some sense into him but doesn't know how. I understand his resistance better than I want to admit. I spent weeks after that night telling myself what he did didn't really count as violation, because we were married, because technically I let him, because I didn't fight back. I convinced myself that married people can't really violate each other, that consent doesn't work the same way when you share a bed every night. Now I'm hearing that he's doing the same thing in reverse, telling himself that psychological torture doesn't count as real trauma, because he's male, because he thinks he had it coming, because admitting he's hurt means admitting he's weak. Virginia asks if I think I could talk to him about it, and I tell her I don't know if that would help or make things worse. She says she'll keep trying with him, and we hang up. The next morning, I'm making coffee at Dion's place when he comes into the kitchen and asks what I'm planning to do long-term about my marriage. The question catches me off guard because I've been so focused on just getting through each day that I haven't thought about months or years from now. I pour my coffee slowly, buying time to think, and then I tell him honestly that I don't know if I can forgive my husband for what he did that night after the stillbirth. Dion leans against the counter and asks if I think my husband can forgive me for the psychological torture, and the question hits me like cold water. I realize I haven't even considered that question. Haven't thought about whether he needs to forgive me or whether I need him to. I've been so stuck in my own hurt and anger that I never stop to wonder if he's sitting at his mom's place thinking the same things about me. Dion watches me process this and then says we both need to figure out if we're trying to save the marriage or just trying to survive what happened. I don't have an answer for him. At my next session with Karen, I tell her about Dion's question and about realizing I never thought about my husband needing to forgive me. She listens and then suggests that maybe my husband and I should see a couples therapist together, in addition to our individual work. The idea makes my stomach tight. Sitting in a room with my husband while someone examines what we did to each other sounds like the worst thing I can imagine. But Karen explains that we can't really move forward, either together or apart, without facing each other and talking about everything that happened. She says individual therapy is helping us both understand ourselves, but couples therapy would help us understand what happened between us. I tell her I'll think about it, even though thinking about it makes me want to throw up. 2 days later, I need to go back to the house to get more of my stuff. I've been wearing the same 5 outfits for weeks and I need my winter coat and some other things. I pick a Tuesday afternoon because my husband should be at work, so I figure the house will be empty. But when I pull into the driveway, his car is there. My first instinct is to leave and come back another time, but I'm already here and I need my things, so I go inside. He's in the bedroom, packing stuff into a box, and we both freeze when we see each other. For a long moment, we just stare, and then he asks if he can say something. I nod, not trusting my voice. He puts down the box and turns to face me fully. He tells me he's been thinking about the moment I started laughing, when he realized everything was fake, and he says he understands now what it felt like for me that night when he pressured me. His voice gets rough, and he says he gets it now. That feeling of your body not being your own, of being trapped by someone who's supposed to care about you. Then his voice breaks completely, and he adds that he's sorry he made me feel that way, that he was selfish and cruel, and he wishes he could take it back. I watch tears run down his face and something in my chest cracks open. I tell him I'm sorry I made him think he was hurting a baby, that I used his fear to torture him, that I took his guilt and twisted it into a weapon. My voice shakes as I say it because part of me still thinks he deserved every second of what I did to him, but another part knows that thinking doesn't make it okay. We stand in our living room, the same room where so much of this happened, and we both cry. It's the first time we've cried together since the 3rd stillbirth, the first time we've shared grief instead of using it against each other. I sit down on the couch because my legs feel weak, and he sits on the other end, keeping distance between us but being in the same space for the first time in weeks. After a while, I tell him about Karen's suggestion for couples therapy. He wipes his face and says his therapist mentioned the same thing. We talk about whether we're ready for that, whether it would help or just make everything worse, and finally we agree to try. He knows a therapist named Rainer who works with couples dealing with trauma, and I say, okay, let's call him. We sit there a little longer, not talking, just existing in the same room without hurting each other, and it feels fragile, but real. Our first session with Rainer is the following week. His office is small and warm, with 2 couches facing each other and his chair at the side. My husband and I sit on different couches, as far apart as we can get while still being in the same room. Rainer introduces himself and explains how couples therapy works, and then he asks us to start by each describing what happened without interrupting each other. The room goes quiet. Neither of us wants to go first. Finally, my husband volunteers and I brace myself. Hearing him describe those weeks from his perspective makes me feel sick. He talks about the growing terror, the confusion of feeling something touch him during sex and not knowing what it was. He describes lying awake at night convinced he was hurting a baby, the shame of it eating at him. He tells Rainer about sleeping in his car because he couldn't stand being near me but couldn't leave because he thought leaving would kill the baby. His voice shakes when he talks about hearing the crying sounds and thinking he was losing his mind. He describes the moment I screamed that the baby was coming out, the pure panic, the way his hands shook so bad he could barely dial 911, and then the laughter, realizing everything was fake, understanding that I'd been playing him the whole time. I did all of that to him on purpose. I planned it and carried it out and watched him suffer, and hearing it from his mouth makes it real in a way it wasn't before. When it's my turn, I describe the stillbirths, all 3 of them, the grief that kept building with nowhere to go. I tell Rainer about coming home from the hospital after the 3rd loss, my body still aching, tears still wet on my face. I describe my husband putting his hand on my thigh, me saying no, and then him complaining about blue balls while I was crying about our dead baby. I explain how he pressured me into sex that night, how I lay there staring at the ceiling feeling like a graveyard while he fell asleep satisfied. I watch my husband's face as I talk, really seeing him hear this for the first time, understanding how violated I felt. His face goes pale and he puts his head in his hands. Rainer lets the silence sit for a moment, and then he points out that we've both been so focused on our own pain that we haven't fully absorbed what we inflicted on each other. He says we've both been victims and we've both been perpetrators, and until we can hold both of those truths at the same time, we can't move forward. The session ends with both of us exhausted and raw, but something has shifted. We've finally heard each other. We walk out of Rainer's office together and neither of us heads toward our separate cars. My husband leans against his sedan in the parking lot and I stand a few feet away, both of us too drained to leave but not ready to be apart yet. He stares at the asphalt and kicks a loose pebble. I watch him do it 3 times before he finally speaks, and tells me he hasn't been able to get hard since that night, that every time he even thinks about sex, his body just shuts down completely. His voice cracks when he says it, and I realize I broke something in him that might not come back. I feel this sick twist in my stomach because I wanted him to understand how violated I felt, but I didn't mean to. I don't know what I meant actually. We stand there for another 40 minutes just talking about things we've never said out loud before, and when we finally get in our cars, I sit in mine for 10 minutes watching him drive away. That night at Dion's apartment, I can't sleep because every time I close my eyes, I see myself through my husband's perspective during those weeks. In the nightmare, I'm this monster wearing my face, smiling while he panics, pressing play on that hidden speaker while he begs me to stop. I wake up sweating and Dion finds me sitting on his couch at 3 a.m. staring at nothing. The next time I see my husband, I tell him about these dreams where I'm the villain and he nods slowly. He tells me he has nightmares too, but his are different. He's back in that moment right after the 3rd stillbirth. And he hears himself complaining about blue balls while I'm crying, and in the dream he can see himself saying it, but he can't stop the words from coming out. We're both being haunted by what we did to each other, and there's something almost fair about that. Rainer gives us homework at the end of our 2nd session. tells us to write letters to each other that we don't have to send, just to get the feelings out without the pressure of the other person reading them. I sit down at Dion's kitchen table with a notebook and start writing, and 3 hours later I have 10 pages front and back. It's rage and grief and guilt all twisted together. Sentences that don't make sense because I'm crying while I write them. I write about the babies and how my body kept failing, and about the moment he touched my thigh in the car. I write about planning the revenge and how good it felt in the moment, and how sick I feel about it now. When I'm done, I realize I'm not just grieving the babies anymore. I'm grieving my marriage and my sense of safety, and the person I thought I was before I became capable of doing what I did. I fold the pages and put them in a drawer and never show them to anyone. At our next couples session, Rainer asks us directly if we want to work towards staying together, or if we want to work towards separating with less damage. My husband and I look at each other and we both admit we don't know the answer to that question. Rainer nods like this is exactly what he expected and says that's okay, that the first goal isn't deciding about the future, but processing what happened and understanding the full extent of the damage we caused each other. He says we can't make good decisions about where to go until we really understand where we are. We spend the rest of the session just sitting with that uncertainty, and it's uncomfortable but also kind of a relief to not have to pretend we know what comes next. My husband starts going to a trauma support group for men who've experienced sexual trauma, and he tells me over text that it's helping him understand that what he went through was real trauma, even though part of him still thinks he deserved it for what he did to me. I'm working on the same thing in reverse with Karen, trying to understand that what he did to me was real violation, even though we were married, and even though I eventually hurt him worse. It's confusing trying to hold both truths at the same time, that we were both victims and both perpetrators, but Rainer says that's exactly the work we have to do. Virginia calls me 3 weeks after the first couples session and asks if we can meet for coffee. My hands shake when I text back yes because I don't know if she wants to yell at me or what. We meet at a place near her house and she orders for both of us, something she used to do before all this happened when we'd meet up for lunch. She sits down and tells me she's been thinking a lot about how she raised her son, whether she somehow taught him that his needs mattered more than other people's needs, if she made him into someone who could do what he did to me. I watch her hands grip her coffee cup too tight, and I see where my husband gets his tendency to blame himself for everything. She looks tired and older than I remember. I ask her directly if she can forgive me for what I did to her son, and she goes quiet for a long time, stirring her coffee even though she already added sugar and cream. Finally, she says she doesn't know yet, but she's trying because she knows I was hurt too. Then she stops stirring and looks right at me and adds that I need to know watching him suffer from what I did has been one of the hardest things she's experienced as a mother. Her voice breaks on the word mother, and I realize I'm not the only one grieving multiple things here. We finish our coffee mostly in silence, and when we leave, she hugs me, but it feels different from before, careful and sad. In my next session with Karen, she asked me to talk about the stillbirths themselves, not what came after, but the actual losses, the babies I never got to hold. I realize I've been avoiding this the whole time, that I went from the third loss to rage so fast I never let myself feel the grief underneath it all. When I finally do let myself feel it, the crying is so hard I can't breathe right. Karen just sits there and lets me fall apart and doesn't try to make it better or move me past it faster. I cry about 3 babies I'll never know and 3 futures that disappeared and the way my body kept failing to do the one thing it's supposed to be able to do. I spend the entire session just crying about the babies I lost, about the nursery we painted after the first pregnancy that we never used. I tell Karen about the names we'd picked out and the tiny clothes I'd bought and hidden in a drawer because I was scared to jinx it. I describe how it felt each time to see the ultrasound screen go still, that moment when you're waiting for movement and it doesn't come and the technician's face changes. Karen asks me if I think my husband was grieving too, and I stop crying for a second, because I never considered that question before. I always saw him as the person who violated me in the middle of my grief, but I never thought about whether he had his own grief happening. I admit this to Karen and she nods slowly. My husband and I have a session with Rainer where he asks us to talk about the stillbirths together for the first time. My husband's voice shakes when he tells me he felt helpless and scared each time we lost a baby, that he didn't know how to fix it or make it better. He says he handled it badly by focusing on sex as a way to feel connected and alive, instead of dealing with the actual loss. He admits he never processed any of it, just pushed it down and tried to move forward, and hearing him say this, I realize we were both drowning in grief we didn't know how to handle. We were both so focused on our own pain that we couldn't see the other person was in pain too. Rainer asks us to sit with that realization, and we do. Both of us crying in his office about the babies we lost, and the ways we failed each other when we needed each other most. 2 days later, we're standing in our backyard with Dion and Virginia, and I'm holding a small dogwood tree while my husband digs the first hole. Virginia brought 2 more trees in pots, and Dion carried the shovels from our garage without being asked. We plant them in a row near the back fence where they'll get morning sun, and nobody talks much during the digging and planting part. When all 3 trees are in the ground, my husband pours water around the roots while I stand there trying to figure out what to say about babies who never got names. Virginia goes first, her voice shaking as she talks about the grandchildren she never got to meet, how she bought a rocking chair after the first pregnancy that's still sitting unused in her attic. Dion says something about how he would have been a good uncle, how he'd already picked out books he wanted to read to them. My husband's turn comes and he kneels by the middle tree, touching the trunk like it's fragile, and he apologizes to the babies for not being a better father even before they were born, for not protecting me or them the way he should have. I'm last, and I can barely get words out. Just manage to say I'm sorry their mother's body couldn't keep them safe, that I hope wherever they are it's better than here. We stand around the trees crying in a way that feels different from all the other crying. Cleaner somehow, like we're finally letting ourselves feel the actual loss instead of everything that came after. Virginia hugs me before she leaves and Dion squeezes my shoulder, and then it's just me and my husband standing by 3 small trees that might actually grow. Later that evening, we sit on the back porch with beers. Neither of us is really drinking, and he asks if I think we can ever have a normal marriage again. I tell him I don't know what normal means for us anymore, that the marriage we had before feels like it belonged to different people. He nods and stares at his beer bottle, picking at the label, and asks if I think we can build something better than what we had. I say maybe, if we're both willing to be honest about what we're capable of when we're hurt. The sun sets while we sit there not talking, just existing in the same space without fear or anger for the first time in months. Our next session with Rainer happens 3 days after the memorial, and he asks how it felt to grieve together. My husband describes the relief of finally acknowledging the losses out loud, and I talk about how strange it was to cry with Virginia and Dion watching. Rainer leans forward and says something that makes us both go quiet. He explains that we might need to grieve our old marriage too, that even if we stay together, we can't go back to who we were before all this happened. The marriage where I trusted him completely died when he coerced me after the stillbirth. The marriage where he felt safe with me died when I tortured him with the fake pregnancy. Rainer says we're trying to resurrect something that's already gone, and maybe we need to let it die so we can build something new. My husband asks what that even means. Building something new, and Rainer says that's what we need to figure out together. The following week, we spend an entire session talking about what a new marriage between us might look like. Rainer asks us to imagine a relationship built on complete honesty about what we're both capable of when hurt, where we know each other's worst moments and choose to stay anyway. My husband says that sounds scary, knowing we could hurt each other again that badly. I admit I'm scared of being that open with him, of trusting him with my real feelings after what he did. Rainer nods and says that's actually where real closeness lives, in the scary truth of knowing each other fully, not in pretending we're better than we are. We leave that session with homework to write down what we'd need from each other to feel safe again, and I spend 3 days staring at a blank page before I can write anything. My next individual session with Karen starts with her asking how I'm feeling about the memorial and the couple's therapy work. I tell her about Rainer's idea of grieving the old marriage, and then I say something I haven't admitted to anyone. I tell her that part of me enjoyed hurting my husband, that the revenge felt good in the moment, that watching him suffer gave me satisfaction. I'm ashamed of now. Karen doesn't look shocked or disappointed, just asks if I can accept that about myself and still choose to be better. I say I'm trying to learn how, trying to hold both truths at once, that I was hurt badly, and that I hurt him badly back. She asks if I think I'm capable of that kind of cruelty again, if I'm wounded enough, and I have to say yes, I think I am, and that scares me more than almost anything else about this whole situation. The next couples session, my husband admits something similar. He tells Rainer he's been struggling with resentment, that sometimes he wants to hurt me back for what I did to him during the fake pregnancy. Rainer asks if he can see how that impulse is exactly what started this whole cycle, how his coercion led to my revenge, which led to his trauma, which led to his desire for revenge. My husband goes very still and then nods slowly, understanding spreading across his face that revenge just creates more damage, that we could keep hurting each other forever if we don't stop the cycle. Rainer asks us both if we're willing to choose not to hurt each other again, even when we're angry or scared, and we both say yes, but neither of us sounds completely sure. 2 weeks later, Rainer asks if we're ready to try spending time together without the structure of therapy sessions. He suggests we meet for dinner once a week. Neutral territory, just trying to remember if we even like each other anymore outside of all this trauma and therapy talk. My husband and I look at each other across Rainer's office and agree to try it, picking a restaurant halfway between Dion's place and Virginia's house where we've been staying. Rainer reminds us that the goal isn't to process or analyze, just to be together and see what that feels like now. Our first dinner happens on a Thursday night at an Italian place we've never been to before. We sit across from each other studying menus and everything feels awkward and careful. I start to mention the memorial and he starts to mention therapy and we both stop mid-sentence and laugh at ourselves. He tries asking about my work, and I try asking about his mother's house, and we keep circling around normal topics like we're learning a new language. The waiter brings bread and we both reach for the same piece and pull back and then laugh again. By the time our food comes, we're talking about a movie he watched at Virginia's and a book Dion recommended to me, and it feels almost easy. When he tells a joke about the movie and I actually laugh, really laugh, not the manic laughter from the 9/11 night but genuine amusement, we both stop and stare at each other. It's the first real laugh we've shared since before the third stillbirth, and we sit there recognizing what just happened, this tiny moment of actual connection. A few days after our dinner, Virginia calls my husband and tells him she thinks he needs to really consider whether he can forgive me and rebuild trust. She loves us both, but she's his mother first, and she needs to know he's not just staying because he feels guilty or obligated. Around the same time, Dion pulls me aside at his apartment and says basically the same thing from the other direction, asking if I can truly forgive my husband, or if I'm just going through the motions. They're both being protective in their own ways, and I appreciate that they're not just pushing us back together for the sake of staying married or avoiding divorce. They want us to be sure this is what we actually want, not what we think we should do. 3 months after the 911 call, my husband and I sit in Rainer's office for what feels like a turning point session. Rainer asks directly if we want to try to rebuild our marriage, and we both say yes at the same time, and then we both admit we're scared. He asks what we're most afraid of, and my husband says he's afraid we'll hurt each other again, because now we know exactly how. I say the same thing, that we've both shown each other our worst selves, and now we have that knowledge. That power to destroy each other if we choose to use it. Raynor nods and says that's actually progress. That we're going into this with our eyes open instead of blind trust. That we know the risks and we're choosing each other anyway. My husband reaches across the space between our chairs and holds out his hand. And I take it. And we sit there holding hands in Raynor's office while he talks about the work ahead of us. And for the first time in months, I feel something like hope. Raynor sees us holding hands and leans forward in his chair. He pulls out a blank sheet of paper and asks if we're ready to create some actual agreements about how we'll move forward. We both nod and he starts writing as we talk through what we need. First agreement is we both keep seeing him for couples therapy every week. No skipping sessions even when things feel better. Second is we each stay in our individual therapy because we both have separate trauma to work through. Third is the big one. If either of us feels violated or trapped or even just uncomfortable, we speak up right away instead of letting it build. My husband squeezes my hand when Raynor writes that one down, and I squeeze back because we both know that's where everything went wrong before. Raynor makes us each sign the paper like it's a real contract, and then he gives us each a copy to keep. The next session we have a week later, we tell Raynor we want to try moving back into our house together. He asks what that would look like, and we've already talked about it. We want separate bedrooms for now. My husband admits he's relieved because he's still having panic attacks about sex, and the idea of sharing a bed makes him feel sick. I tell Raynor I'm relieved too because I'm not ready to be that vulnerable with him, to trust him with my body again after everything. Raynor says that's actually healthy, that we're being honest about our limitations instead of forcing intimacy we're not ready for. We spend the session planning out practical stuff like who gets which bedroom and how we'll handle shared spaces. Moving back in feels weird from the first moment. We're like roommates who are being really careful not to upset each other. The first night I cook dinner and he sets the table and we eat across from each other making small talk about work. After dinner we watch TV but we sit on opposite ends of the couch with a whole cushion between us. When bedtime comes we say goodnight in the hallway and go into our separate rooms, and I hear his door close and lock. The next few weeks follow the same pattern. Careful conversations about safe topics, cooking meals together but not touching, existing in the same space but maintaining distance. Sometimes I catch him looking at me like he's trying to figure out if I'm the same person he married, and I'm doing the same thing with him. We're learning each other again, but this time we're seeing the full picture, not just the good parts we wanted to see before. One night we're doing dishes together and our hands touch in the soapy water and we both pull back fast like we got burned. Then we laugh at ourselves for being so jumpy and it breaks some of the tension. After that things get a little easier, we can be in the same room without it feeling like we're walking on glass. 4 months after the 911 call, we have a session where Raynor asks us to talk about what progress we've made. My husband goes first and says he's learned to recognize his entitlement and selfishness, how he put his needs above mine when I was grieving. He says he's working on being better than that, on actually considering how his actions affect me. When it's my turn, I tell Raynor I've learned I'm capable of real cruelty when I'm hurt, that I can plan and execute something truly terrible if I feel justified. I say I'm working on dealing with pain in ways that don't destroy other people. Raynor nods and says we're both acknowledging our worst moments instead of making excuses, and that's real progress. Then he asks if we've thought about the future, about whether we might want to try for another baby someday. The question makes us both go quiet, and we look at each other across the office. My husband says he's not ready to even think about that yet, and I agree immediately. Raynor says that's actually healthy, that we need to heal ourselves and fix our marriage before we can think about bringing a kid into it. We agree to table that whole discussion for at least a year, maybe longer. On the drive home from that session, my husband asks if I think we'll ever be normal again. I tell him I don't think we can go back to what we were before, but maybe we can build something different. He says different might be better than what we had since what we had led to all of this. We're not fixed and we're not the same people we were before all this happened. Some days are good and we actually laugh together and enjoy each other's company. Other days are hard and we both have nightmares or moments where the resentment comes back. He still has panic attacks sometimes and I still have days where I'm so angry at him I can barely look at his face. But we're choosing each other anyway, with full knowledge of what we're both capable of when we're hurt and scared. We know exactly how much damage we can do to each other, and we're choosing to try not to do it again. Somehow that feels more real than the trust we had before, when we thought we knew each other, but really we were just seeing what we wanted to see. Now we see everything, the good and the terrible, and we're still here trying to figure out how to be married to each other. It's not a happy ending, because we're not at an ending at all. We're somewhere in the middle of learning how to build something new from the ruins of what we destroyed.